Hey everybody, hope you guys all had a great 4th of July holiday celebrating our nation's birth. Just wanted to take a second here before we jump into today's video and let you guys know that yes, I'm still building transmissions. Had a couple people reach out to me on social medias asking if I was still doing transmissions during the summer or if I was racing full-time. As much as I'd love to be racing full-time, I'm absolutely still building transmissions. Not only am I still building them, but I'm also still building entry-level transmissions for your daily driver, stock horsepower truck, all the way up to the racing stuff that we do and everything in between. So if you're looking for a 47, 48 RE build, I'm still your guy. Keep me in mind. We're still rolling strong on those. So now, on with the video. What's up, YouTube? So we're about ready to go back to the track today to do some more testing with the Fossil. So, been having an internal battle with myself about the cause of the last issues, referring to it killing itself when it would get up on boost. And just, I had the insatiation to know exactly what every mechanical thing is doing, and just part of me just wasn't sold on the fuel shutoff thing. I just kept thinking about it and kept looking at the fuel shutoff and thinking about what the fuel shutoff actually does in the pump and how that works exactly, and I just didn't believe that that was my problem. And like I had said, like I told my guys right after the pass, and like I've said on the other video, it felt like it locked the converter. So that had me going back to thinking about what did I change, what's different with the transmission, what's different with the converter, what's going on. And I started thinking about the dump and how I was turning the dump off once it got up onto 13 pounds of boost. And I kind of had like an epiphany, and I remember when we first started this whole non-lockup dump valve venture, we had it in JP's truck back in 2018, and I remember he went to an NHRDA race out in Sacramento. It was his first time actually going to the track with the new setup, and back then we didn't separate power to the dump valve and the trans brake. We just had it wired to where when the trans brake was on, the dump valve was on. Well, the problem with that is when his bump box was interrupting power to the trans brake to allow it to bump, and when it would do that, it would interrupt power to the dump valve, and so basically it would turn the dump valve off for a second every time he would bump. And when it was doing that, it was doing the same thing my truck was doing. It would be up on boost, he'd bump, and it would fall on its face. It just, and then it would run, and then he'd bump it again, it'd fall on its face, and then it'd come back to life. And so it was because it was interrupting the dump, it was turning it off. So that got me thinking that, man, that had to be what I'm experiencing. So I ran this by James, the valve body guy at Gearin, a friend of mine, and he actually sent me back some graphs and further confirmed that that's definitely what was going on, because when the dump valve, when you turn it off and it refills the converter, on their transmission dyno, they're able to measure output torque, and the output torque would get tremendously higher as the converter refilled. So essentially it's putting a ton of torque on the engine. Now their dyno is an electric motor dyno, and electric motors, that's all they are, is torque. So it's not like it tried to kill the dyno when he would turn the dump off during the stall test. But on a diesel engine that's air and fuel limited, if you allow it to make that much torque that quickly, and you don't give it more fuel and more air, basically more RPM, if you don't do something to maintain as that torque comes in, it just drags the motor down. And on this big turbo stuff, you know, once it puts a load on and it gets it off of, 12, 13 pounds of boost, it just kills it. It just falls under the turbo. And that's why it would just, it would drag it way down, and then the dump valve would turn back off, and then it would be fine. So we haven't I haven't even touched the truck. It's been in the trailer. So we are gonna go back to the track today. When I get there, I'm just gonna make that change in the smart wire to turn the dump back on, essentially, to where we don't turn the dump off until it's off of trans brake release, and hopefully make 2 or 3 runs and see if that is in fact our problem. But I'm very, very convinced and I'm assured that that's definitely what we're experiencing. So we're going back to confirm and make some more 60-foot licks and hopefully get our 60-foot back into the 130s like it needs to be. We're gonna turn the boost up, talk to a couple people that have been helping me on this deal, and they both agreed that it needs more starting line RPM, it needs more boost, it needs more power to get the tire set right initially. And looking back at last year and what we were doing, it all makes perfect sense. It needs more power right at the hit. So we're gonna get to the track, we're gonna make a little boost change, we're gonna give it a little bit more starting line fuel, hopefully make about 3 pounds more boost, do a spool up, and then make our first pass. So I'll turn the camera back on when we get there. Spool up there, I gave it 2 more turns on the staging limiter, so I allowed it to make a little bit more fuel on the limiter, and I did that change in the smart wire to leave the dump valve on until trans brake was released. Those 2 turns surprisingly made it 29.4 pounds of boost on the limiter, which is a little bit annoying because I don't like to do any more spool ups than we have to do, especially if we're at the track. So that was too much of a change. So ultimately I really needed to do another spool up, and so before the next spool up I turned it down 1.5 turns because apparently 2 turns made a huge change. So I cooled it down, moved that fuel back, left everything else alone, and then did this spool up here. So that one was pretty much exactly where we wanted it. That was 23 pounds of boost on the limiter, nice flat limiter. So felt like we were definitely good to go up there to make our first pass. We had just done 2 spool ups and our dying issue hasn't returned yet. So I'm feeling pretty confident with 23 pounds of boost that we're gonna go up there and we're gonna stick the tire and hopefully make a nice 60-foot hit. So go up there, do my normal procedure, pre-stage, start spooling it up, go to stage, and our gremlin has still returned. At this point, I'm pretty aggravated. I was very, very convinced by talking to James and previous experiences and the data that that was going to solve this crazy phenomenon that we're experiencing, and it did not. So luckily I was able to spool it back up and make the run. The run wasn't, I could tell right away that it wasn't any crazy fast pass. It wasn't anything super over the top amazing. It was just, you know, just felt very mediocre to me. Let it run out, make the 1-2 shift, ran it just a little bit into second gear, and then I dumped out of it. Went like a 420 to the 330, and it went a 146 60 foot. Went back and looked at the data, and it actually left on 25.8 pounds of boost, which was a little bit more than what I was expecting. And usually, like, once you set the limiter on this thing, it's very consistent. So I was definitely concerned as to why it went up almost 3 pounds of boost on there. And at this point, I'm thinking, this is strange that it also, 2 turns made such a big change from the last time we had it out. But I have so much other stuff going on my mind. When you're at the track, it's hard to really sit down and think about every little thing. That's usually, I'll do most of my problem solving the week after or days later. But going back over the data, the tire pressure is 14 psi on that run. Told you it made 25.8 pounds of boost. The bottle pressure was 917. I haven't changed anything on the nitrous setup since before, so just that 60 jet coming on at the hit, leaving that 028 spool jet on. And when I looked at the video, it still has that where it just clicks the tire just a little bit. It just turns it just a little bit right on the starting line. And it's just not hitting the tire hard. And man, with 25.8 pounds of boost, like, it should hit the tire hard. For reference, my 135 60 foot is my personal best on the radials from last year. And that was with 22.5 pounds of boost. So 25 pounds of boost with a shorter tire, with more starting line ratio, it should really try to whip that tire up into shape, and it's just not doing it. So according to my notes here, we went through some stuff. At this point, I'm laser focused on figuring out whatever this issue is that we're experiencing with it dying. I'm not super concerned yet about the 60 foot and why the staging limiter's kind of all over the place. I'm more or less trying to figure out why this thing keeps dying when I'm up on boost. I kind of go through all kinds of different scenarios, and I keep going back to what changed from last year to this year. And so last year, for most of the year, I had a bump set up in the SmartWire, so I would actually bump in. And a lot of the testing I was doing, honestly, I wasn't even bumping. I was just turning both bulbs on and then spooling it up. But this year, one of the things that I wanted to make sure every time I test, that I want to improve the entire program, so I need to be making sure that I can stage correctly in a timely manner and all that good stuff. So I've been practicing the entire procedure. And so the way I'm doing it, like I've told you, is I foot brake it in, and then I set the trans brake. Well, the conditions for my air throttle, my staging limiter, is the foot brake either has to be pressed or the trans brake has to be pressed. And I'm using brake pressure to tell the SmartWire that the brake is pressed. And so you got to give it a decent amount of pedal input before it'll, the SmartWire will detect it. So what I thought was happening, based on the video, was that I thought that basically I would spool up, and as soon as the turbo starts making boost, as soon as I see the boost numbers start coming up on the dash, I will let off the brake a little bit to roll the truck in. And so I thought what was happening is basically I was letting off the brake, and I was losing brake pressure from the SmartWire before I set the trans brake button. And so basically there was a gap in there where my air throttle would go wide open again. And my thoughts were that, well, if it's only making 10, 11 pounds of boost, and if you try to go wide open throttle with it on a mechanical setup like this with huge injectors and stuff, like, it's just going to flood it out and kill it. So I was thinking, all right, well, maybe that's what it is. So I called JP, ran it by him, what he thought about it. And so he told me to change a condition in there to where basically it had to be under 20 pounds of boost to those conditions to be correct. So essentially, as long as I rolled in before it made 20 pounds of boost, it didn't matter if there was an overlap. So it essentially would eliminate that position, that problem. So, and then my buddy Newman, he came up with actually a better way to do it, but for all intensive time purposes, we really needed to make one more, and his way of doing it would take a little bit more logic and thought process, so I just kind of did it the way that JP had recommended. So go up there for the next run, and this time, you know, the nice thing about having somebody that is in tune with your program, especially if you can have 2 or 3 guys that are really in tune with your program, they'll look at stuff that you don't have time to look at. So while I'm sitting here laser focused trying to figure out why this thing keeps dying, somebody like JP and Newman can be talking to each other about the suspension, about the boost, you know, what the tire is doing, and so they can kind of help formulate a plan on that while I'm trying to troubleshoot. So it's really important to have a couple good guys in your corner if you can, just because when it comes to at the track and you're doing stuff like this, you run out of time so fast. You would think that from 5:30 to 10:30 you could make runs. You think you could make 20 runs, but I'm telling you, all it takes is like just a couple little stupid things and you'll get 1 or 2 runs in that night if you're lucky. So while I'm focused on that, they're kind of giving me suggestions on the tune-up, so what we need to do. And so JP really wanted me to try to turn the dump on. Turn the dump off before I left the starting line to see if we could get it to hit the tire harder, because something's not happy here. So that was the easiest, quickest change that we could make and still make one more lap that night. So we made that change, go up there, spool it up. This time it does not die, so I'm happy about that. Roll it in, let go of the brake, and it just flat power. I immediately knew that I had goofed something in the smart wire condition in a hurry, trying to get up there to make one more run, and basically it never came off of my staging limiter. So it left on 25 pounds of boost, and it just hung out at 25 pounds of boost. And so as soon as it did that, I realized that, you know, what the problem was, and I lifted. The only thing we could really get from that run that was remotely useful was just what the tire did on the starting line. We looked at the video, and man, it didn't look any different than the run before. You could hear it, you know, skirt the tire just a little bit, but man, the tire is just not doing what it needs to do. It's not stopping the tire at the starting line like it needs to. It just doesn't seem like there's any power in it. And JP kept saying that to us. He's like, man, are you sure that thing's making, you know, the boost that you think you're making? Are you sure the boost sensor isn't messed up? And I definitely was not discounting that, because I've had a boost sensor read incorrectly before. But looking at the RPM, I've ran that converter long enough, because we had that converter in JP's truck since 2019, that I know, okay, if it's making 3,600 RPM, engine RPM, you know, it should be making around this much boost. So it all seemed to jive. So that was our last run for the night. Unfortunately, we're out of time, and at this point, I'm pretty convinced that we have something wrong. Not something that's just a simple fix, not something that's just a condition in the smart wire. Something is mechanically wrong with this thing. So I take a little bit of time, and I sit down and I go over pretty much every log that I had from the end of last year when I was making consistent 135 to 137 60 foots. And I started really paying attention to what I was leaving the starting line at with those, what the converter efficiency was at the top of first gear on those, picking points in the runs and checking converter efficiency, checking RPM, checking boost, just looking at what it was doing last year, and then the same thing with every run I've made this year, and looking at all of those same points in it to see if I could find a correlation of anything. And I found several things. The first thing that I was looking at is obviously what is this problem that we're having that's killing the truck. And every single time it's happened, I've been on the trans brake. In the Smart Wire, it logs trans brake, so you can see there's a flat line when the trans brake's on, and then when it's off, there's no line. And every single time that I've had a log of it doing this, except for once, I've been on the trans brake already. So that theory of my staging deal is out the window. That's not what's going on. I wrote down what the transmission temperature was, what the line pressure was, I wrote down everything on every single time that it's done this stall deal. And every time it's been within 50 to 60 RPM of each other. They've all been 3,300-ish RPM. They've all been between 12 to 15 pounds of boost when it's done it. And the trans temperature has all been between 115 to 120. And line pressure has always been within 10 psi on every single one too. EGT has been the same on every single time. It's upper 1200s. So every single time that it's done this issue, it's right around the same RPM. It's right around the same amount of boost. I don't 100% know if that means anything, but it at least whatever the problem is, it's being very consistent. So I went and looked at all of my other data as far as the converter efficiency and boost versus the run and everything. And like I said earlier, the 135 60 foot and the 377 to the 330, that was on 22.5 pounds of boost, fuel only. And the converter at the top of first gear at 5,200 RPM was 90% efficient. So the converter was very happy there. On this last run that I made with this 146 60 foot, the converter efficiency was down all the way. Now, take for granted, it made the 1-2 shift a little bit too early on this run. It made the 1-2 shift at almost 4,700 RPM. So the more RPM you make, the more efficient the converter is going to be. But converter efficiency was down to 68%. I went and looked at a similar RPM on the 90% efficiency run, and at that similar 4,700 RPM, the converter was still 87% efficient on that run. So we're down from essentially 87% to 68% efficiency on the converter, and it's got less power in it. That's with the fuel cut all the way back, and we've only got one little nitrous kit on right now. So that right there told me that there's absolutely something wrong with this converter. I also looked at the engine RPM from the 135 60 foot, and at 22.5 pounds of boost, this thing was at 3,070 RPM. At 25 pounds of boost on my last run, it was at 3,600 RPM. So it's a little bit more boost. So a little bit more boost means that it would have made a little bit more RPM, but it's solidly over 300 RPMs looser. And we know that it's down on efficiency all the way down to 68%. So I am very much convinced that something is wrong with the converter. The converter's going away. Possibly the sprag is broke in it. I also noticed from looking at all my notes that I've taken this year is every pass we've made, the 60 foot has been slower. So out of the 3 runs that we've actually, made it through the 60 foot, we started with a 142, and that was with a pedal. We did a 144 with a little pedal, and then we did a 146 with no pedal. So every pass we've made, it's gotten, quite a bit slower. So I think, and I'm going to go back to what I said before, as soon as I got out of the truck, the first time it did that dying thing, I said it feels like it locked a converter. After seeing all these efficiency numbers, RPM numbers, and just the weirdness of the staging limiter, how the staging limiter is just up and down, there's really no exact rhyme or reason to it. I think something is going on with the torque converter. So my next plan is to get the truck unloaded and get the converter swapped out. I have another converter here that I've been wanting to try for a while. It's a little bit tighter converter than what we had in it. And based on what I've seen here, it could use a little bit tighter of a converter. It's always possible that that could be the wrong direction to go, but I would rather at this point start with just a hair tighter than what we were currently running, because I think it's going to help with the tire, and I think that I could ultimately leave with a little bit less boost and make everything happier. So that's the next plan, is to get the converter out of the truck. And then I'm going to get the converter sent back to Gearin so that they can cut it open and see what the heck happened. I don't know if I heard it when the dump valve got stuck and it drained it. I don't know if I tore something up then, or if it's just some weird failure. This converter doesn't owe us anything. It's the same converter that we ran in JP's truck since 2019. It's got tons of 5.0 passes on it, tons of low 5-second passes, 4-wheel drive burnouts, lots and lots of spool ups on it. That thing is Old Faithful, and I'm not mad at it at all. But it's part of it. I think on JP's truck we had 8 different converters in that thing, testing different stators and stalls before we found something that particular truck was just really happy with. So this is a little bit name of the game, and I'm happy to just figure out what the heck we have going on here. I can't tell you guys how valuable this note keeping has been this year. Last year I wasn't good about keeping notes. I really didn't keep any notes. If I didn't make a good run on a time slip, I just kind of threw it in the corner and didn't even pay any attention to it. Took okay notes with JP's truck. Really, he did most of the note taking on that. But this year I've been really trying to take good notes. Like, I have been, every single pass, you know, I'm writing down even what the temperature was that day, all kinds of stuff. And what that allowed me to do was go back and look at logs and write all this stuff down and figure out these problems. If it wasn't for data and taking these notes, I think I'd still be really, really lost on what to do. And I probably wouldn't, you know, arrived to the decision of changing the converter at this point. I'd probably waste more track time, more fuel, more nitrous, more resources in general. So this is why I preach data logger stuff so much, and now I'm definitely going to be preaching the note thing. So we will get the truck unloaded, we'll get the transmission out of it, and we will let you guys know what we find with that. And we'll have to do some more spool ups, because we'll be starting all over with a little bit tighter converter. It's going to change the way the staging limiter is. So I will get back with you guys as soon as we get onto that path. Stick with me on this deal. Success is right around the corner, I promise. We just got to go through some trials and tribulations to get there. But like always, guys, I appreciate you watching, and we will catch you on the next one.